Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Your Bread and Butter Podcast. I'm Ryan Cummings.
And I'm Andrew Beaudry. Today we're going to be looking at who does what and when with my money.
Goal of today's episode is to better understand some of the common financial terms. Custodians, broker-dealers, who are they? What do they do? What role do they play in your finances?
And do you know why the custodian changed jobs to becoming a detective?
I don't. Why?
No, he was really good at finding dirt. Ha ha!
Discussions in this show should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional before making important investment decisions. Securities offered through Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a registered broker-dealer. Member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors Incorporated, a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Private Financial Design LLC are not affiliated.
Bread and butter.
Welcome back. Today's episode, as we mentioned, discussing custodians, broker-dealers. Who are some of these individuals involved with your finances when you do work with a financial advisor? Maybe you've heard some of these terms thrown around, and I know with some of our clients, there's often some confusion on what role each party plays. They see different names on statements, and the goal of today is to hopefully go through these different layers, these different organizations, and help shed some light on the roles they play within these finances.
Exactly. I mean, we have in our industry, we have a number of layers, a number of gatekeepers, we'll call it, and each has a different role. Now, we're not going to do it in today's episode, but we also have regulatory agencies like the SEC, Securities Exchange Commission, and FINRA. So we'll talk about them in another episode, but today we're going to be talking about custodians and broker-dealers. So investments are handled through multiple organizations and layers, and your education is critical to understanding informed decisions. Understanding each role helps prevent problems for you and improves your communication with your advisor.
And so let's talk about high level here, and we'll show this up on the screen. You'll see some different terms, some key people that are involved with your finances when you do work within a financial advisor. So on the, probably the most familiar, on the straight direct point of contact, the person you see more regularly is your financial advisor. They're providing you with the investment advice, maybe managing your portfolio, doing more complex financial planning, whether it's estate planning, tax planning, insurance planning, etc. That's the person that I think you'll have the most familiarity with, and most people I think have the least confusion.
Correct, exactly. And then the next one is the broker-dealer, who the financial advisor works through in processing your investment orders, trade executions, things like that. Then you have your custodian, who actually holds and safeguards the client assets. And again, ultimately, it's you, the investor. So when we get to all of those levels, we'll talk about those two, broker-dealer and custodian. And so let's dive in first on our first topic. The broker-dealer's responsibilities are very unique, and this is not a custodian responsibility. It's not a financial advisor. In fact, most people, when they think of broker-dealers, you hear the old joke of, well, every time they make a deal for me, they make me more broker. So that's not exactly what's going on here. But number one, their job as your broker-dealer, and for us, that is Cambridge Investment and Research Group, they execute client trades for stocks, bonds, ETFs, mutual funds, and other securities.
They also help route orders, ensure that there's proper trade settlement, and they also provide some oversight, some supervising of advisors, making sure that there's, some compliance regulation that are in line with those other regulatory bodies you mentioned, like the SEC, like FINRA, and even state-specific regulations. So they're kind of the overseer, if you will, that even though they're not the ones directly holding the funds, that's the custodian we'll talk more about later, they're the ones overseeing what the advisor's doing, processing a lot of what the custodian's doing as well, too, and kind of making sure that everything's in balance along the way.
Correct. So as we have here on the screen, you can see our little stick figure cartoon guy is in compliance. He's looking over all of the regulations, and this is the broker-dealer's role in making sure that from a broker-dealer perspective, everything is working according to the rules of engagement with not just them, but also the advisors and the people that are overseeing those advisors. Compliance is a very big part of what the broker-dealer does.
And so we alluded to compliance, we keep talking about it, but what does compliance actually mean? What is that term, that role actually that the broker-dealer is actually playing? And so the compliance make sure that, again, the advisor is performing in line with regulations. So that could be things like monitoring communications and recommendations given. So that way there's no lines crossed, because there are a lot of rules and regulations around if we do any marketing, post things online, use any illustrative pieces, there's certain things you can and can't say that cross certain lines, certain laws. And same with the recommendations that advisors give. There are certain things that are within our scope and certain things that we have to stay more educational and rather than giving advice, more just knowledge based on instead of direct recommendations.
Sometimes people get annoyed by the fact we ask about a source of money for deposits, and they don't realize that one of the things that a broker-dealer does is they are anti-money laundering and a know your client oversight, meaning that we're supposed to know and list where the money comes from when somebody's making a deposit. People don't like that because they feel like it's an invasion of their privacy, but that's the law. We have to know where money comes from, and so forth. And then knowing your client means that, if they're placing a lot of trades and they're getting a lot of cash trades and things that are kind of odd, that's not their norm, that's reportable. And as well, they're also overseeing the cybersecurity controls, which has become a really big deal, huge deal. Yes. And unfortunately, people don't like a lot of that security, the multi-factor authentication. And people have problems with it. I get it. But
it's necessary.
It's necessary because people are out there trying to take your money illegally as well as legally. So.
And then you get into, some of the, I think, boring stuff, but still important that broker-dealers do, required keeping of records and audit trails. That way, if, the advisor ever ran into any issues, or even the client ever ran into the issues, there's clear records, clear trails of everything that's happening. And then meeting standards for what's called a regulation BI, best interest. So maintaining best interest records for our clients.
Correct. So best interest is one of those things that it's not black and white. But if we feel like a client is not really doing something that's in their best interest, we need to speak to them. If we do something that's not in client's best interest, we are in trouble. Right. Now, I want to say this because when it comes to compliance, I looked this up and it was a little bit of fun. Not a lot of fun, but a little bit of fun. There are actually more rules in our industry about engaging with a client than there are for transporting hazardous waste. So,
it makes sense. I'm not surprised.
not that our business is more dangerous than hazardous waste, but the truth is, since money is our only source of supplying our life, I guess it is an important part of what we do. So, broker-dealer provides client protection as well.
They do. That whole best interest is tied into a lot of different things. It's tied into investment suitability. So if we recommend certain investments, certain products, certain asset classes, do they meet the suitability for that client's individual situation, their income level, their tax situation, their goals and their priorities? And then on top of that, making sure that clients are fully aware of any risks involved with those investments, any fees involved with those investments, and probably most importantly, conflicts of interest.
Correct.
So that way that advisors can't, double dip in certain scenarios, or have a vested interest in recommending one investment over another.
Correct.
Because you want to be making recommendations based on not what's good for your own pocket, but what's good for the client.
Correct. And I think part of that, as an advisor, that the broker-dealer is concerned with is, are we doing our due diligence on recommending investment products? So we could think of a product that's great for a client, but if we were to dive into it, we may not want to recommend it because that particular company has a very poor track record in staying into their objective, or they've had some legal issues that put a little shadow over their integrity. So there are certain things like that you have to be really careful for as an advisor, but the broker-dealer wants to make sure we're doing that. And also, there is an investor protection framework like SIPC, which we can talk about at a different time and a different place, but there is some protection there for cash assets in particular and other assets that are held in securities. So part of that is in all of what we're trying to do is looking at trying to protect and guard our clients' assets.
This is kind of an illustration of what we just discussed. The broker-dealer's role to make sure that those assets are protected, that there is, the proper custody being held of them, and everything, rules are being kept, and the assets are in a safe space. So, that's all something that is part of this broker-dealer role.
Correct. And it combines with as well, and we'll talk about this later in the custodian, but it combines as well with the custodian.
It does.
So
right. Yeah. Now, not every advisor is necessarily working with a broker-dealer. There are advisors that do operate as independents or RIAs, registered investment advisors, is the acronym that stands for. And there's some key differences here, whereas broker-dealers are often more focused on transactional or commission-based. RIAs are typically more associated with advice-based, advice-focused, and generally fee-based. Big difference between the two as far as how they operate.
Yeah, broker-dealers operate under the best interest standards. RIAs operate under fiduciary standards. Currently in our firm, we operate under an RIA through Cambridge Investment and Research, and so we are held to a higher fiduciary standard than just regular best interest.
Right.
So
there's some similarities for sure. Both are looking at suitability for clients and best interest of their clients, et cetera, but some subtle differences between the two.
Correct. And lastly, for the broker-dealer, and probably most importantly for the client when they're purchasing securities, is they do a pricing review. They make sure that this is the right trade for the client.
Yeah, whenever a trade is submitted, there's a market for that trade, different bid and ask prices, and the broker-dealer's role is to help that make sure the client's getting that fair price, based on the current market for whether it's a stock or a bond or a mutual fund, et cetera, that the client's trading at an accurate price for those investments.
Exactly right. And as a broker-dealer, it's their job to take that order and to place it in the right place at the right time. And that comes back to the whole routing thing we talked about earlier, that it gets to the right place at the right time at the right price. So the custodian is our next topic to go through. And so we have here, we'll put up on a slide here for you, showing you just a basic guideline of what the custodian does. Oh, yeah, they clean up messes. So my dad worked as a custodian for 30-something years here in our local town. And I can remember very clearly going into the schools where he was working, and the floors were always waxed, everything was in its right place, anything that was dangerous or harmful to the students or the teachers was repaired and cared for. And we don't, as a society, necessarily have a really high view of people who are custodians. And having growing up work as a child, having my dad work as a custodian, I heard a lot of disparaging remarks about custodians, with people not realizing that my dad was a custodian. But the truth is that custodians are the people that do take care of behind the scenes, and the responsibilities of a custodian are quite vast.
Yeah, a lot of different things that they play the role of as far as actually safeguarding the assets separately from advisory firms. So, a lot of people think, well, you opening an account and where are my assets actually being held? Well, there are these third-party companies, custodians, and there's to name a few. We're talking companies like your Fidelities or Charles Schwab's, your Vanguards, Pershing or BNY Mellon. A lot of these companies, they just provide, even though they may not be the ones providing the advisory services, they provide account record keeping and account administration services. So that way, us as advisors, we can actually trade investments and process and complete trades for our clients using these custodial services.
Right, and I know sometimes people get very upset and annoyed with we want to set up an account a certain way, and the custodian comes back and says no. We don't allow that. There might be a custodian out there that does, but we don't allow it. And they have their reasons for it. And as we dig into those reasons, it's usually something that does benefit the client and it does protect them. If we go back to the earlier slide that we showed with the guardian here, the guardian securing assets is really a main role of the custodian because they're the ones that actually have the safe in many situations, but they work together with the broker-dealer to make sure those assets are secure. There's not a lot of paper certificates these days. They're mostly digital certificates,
right?
The old-fashioned stock certificates and all of that being in a safe. But the truth is, they also do have a fiduciary duty. They have to have their prudence, their integrity, safekeeping. And actually, prior to September 11th, we had a much more, September 11th, 2001, we had a much more substantial number of custodians out there. And after September 11th, those began to be consolidated for a lot of different reasons. But I think when the Trade Center bombing occurred, there was a loss of records. In some instances, they were able to get those repaired and up to snuff. So they've consolidated some of the broker-dealer, some of the custodians out there, to make it a little bit easier to track and keep things. I don't know that there's many new custodians on the horizon, but the custodian here in processing trade clearing and settlement activities, they're the ones that make sure that everything does occur in the right way. So the broker-dealer routes the traffic, but these guys make sure it gets to the destination.
Exactly. They're kind of handling the nuts and bolts of these transactions, deposits, withdrawals, ACH transfers, wires, you name it. That's all on the custodian's shoulders.
Correct.
And then you even mentioned it. An additional responsibility of theirs is that record keeping and reporting. So, while, yes, broker-dealers do keep a record of some stuff too, the actual nuts and bolts, the little detailed records within the account, every transaction, that's all going to be on the custodian. They're the ones maintaining the account. So it's account balances, transaction history, other very important things like cost basis. So you know what your tax liability is and tax reporting at the end of each year, all little details that the custodian not only has to keep, but provide to the advisor and the client.
Yeah, sometimes we get people that inherited stock from a mother, father, grandfather, friend, uncle, whatever, and they need the cost basis updated. So we have to work with the custodian on that to give the accurate record keeping. The custodian is the ones that takes care of that. We don't do it, but we can give them the research and then they make the decision as to whether that's a legitimate cost basis change because it does change the taxable outcome. They also are the ones that generate account statements and trade confirmations. A lot of people think that that's our role.
Right.
I mean, they put our phone number on it for our office. Like, you have a problem with this statement, call your advisor. Okay, you can call us, but we're not the custodian. We don't actually create these account statements or trade confirmations. And lastly, they're the ones that issue tax documents like your 1099s.
They do,
and that's a whole other ball of wax because, some people want to get e-delivery, but then when it comes time to, get their taxes to their accountant, they've forgotten their password for their e-delivery and all those sort of things. But that's the custodian's work. We don't have any role in any of that. So this is a really big part. Custodian compliance and asset protection is a significant goal and mission of a custodian.
They're part of that goal is to segregate client assets, maintain audit trails. Again, that's why there's not this commingling of assets. Everything's clean and in the client's name. And a lot of that's tied to SEC and FINRA regulations. And if they're not meeting, these safeguard rules and regulations, they could be subject to audits and examinations by the SEC or by FINRA. So they're not just doing it, out of the goodness of their heart, which, don't get me wrong, it's stuff that's in the best interest of the client, but there's actual laws and rules behind, a lot of the ways that custodians have to maintain these accounts.
And they provide some of the SIPC, which is a protection of the actual stocks and bonds and stuff that you hold inside of there. And they do offer some excess SIPC protections if you go beyond that limit. They also work with reducing fraud risk through their own independent oversight that's separate from the registered investment advisor, the broker-dealer, or ourselves. And that's a really big part of what they do as well.
And the way for them to do a lot of this is also providing the proper infrastructure and technology to maintain these accounts and maintain these platforms and records. So this technology can help provide the ability for trading or management of the investments on their platform. So that way, things aren't done, through paper anymore or over the phone. And us as advisors managing a portfolio or making a trade for the client, or whether it's some of our our staff making trades for us or transactions.
Yeah, they're not making trades for us.
Well, if they have certain if they have certain licenses, they can.
Yeah, certain licenses, right? They have to be licensed.
Correct.
I think our administrative staff is out there trading away, but no, they have to be licensed.
Well, no, but at the direction of the advisor. So they could do that for the advisor in those when given that direction, or even just processing deposits or withdrawals.
Right. Correct. Yes. Correct. Yeah.
All those things are done through the platforms and the technologies that the custodians provide.
Correct. Exactly right. And they enable the idea of getting access to your account as well as your document management. And they're background operations for advisors and RIAs. Mm-hmm. Without custodians, you don't get that independent protection.
Right.
So
to begin to summarize everything, we talked about the custodian, the broker-dealer, how this relationship works. The investor, you own the assets. You're the one who actually has the ownership of those assets. They're not going anywhere, even if they're in a different account. They're still your dollars, your investments, your money. The financial advisor provides the guidance, the recommendations, the investment advice, even maybe some of the trades and et cetera. And then you get into the broker-dealer, who supervises and processes investment activity, kind of oversees that whole process. And then finally, the custodians, actually holding the assets, safeguarding them, maintaining records, processing some of those transactions, for the financial advisor, and then ultimately for you, the investor, the client.
So our key takeaways here is, number one, each organization in this discussion has a unique and important role.
It does. They provide checks and balances to ultimately help protect you, the investor, and to, part of this process, part of the goal of today was hopefully everyone walks away with a better understanding of the different responsibilities of these different roles that the broker-dealers and the custodians play to help ultimately improve you, the investor, your confidence in what us, the advisors, are doing with those assets.
And education always helps. To help you be able to ask better questions and avoid your own mistakes, when you are trying to process a trade or you want to be able to do something. This is a big part of understanding how to be actually a good investor or to do your own financial plan in the right way. So can you trade without a broker-dealer? Well, yeah, you can go and you can do some of the mobile apps and you can do those things, but even those people have a seat on Wall Street somewhere, and so somebody along the way is going to be your custodian, and somewhere along the way, somebody's going to be your broker-dealer.
Right. So whether you realize it or not, you're still, even if you're not working with a financial advisor, you're still likely working with these other institutions underlying, even if it's the digital apps out there, or you're doing some DIY investing, you're still within these institutions.
And this is what some of them call a hybrid broker-dealer, or a broker-dealer kind of is hybrid. It also does the investment advising, and it does some of that. Mm-hmm. So anyway, those are some real key takeaways we want you to understand and take with you today. We're very glad that you sat with us today and you listened and watched through. And remember, live today for the tomorrow that's in your heart.
Because you'll never have more time to invest for tomorrow than you do today.
Thank you for listening.
Bread and butter.